Hello, sisters and brothers at Prairie Street Mennonite Church. It is good to be worshiping with you today. This is our last Sunday in the series on the wilderness, where we have looked at stories from the book of Numbers of God's people in the wilderness, because for a lot of us right now, it feels that we are in a similar situation, in a place that we don't quite understand, where we're not quite sure where our direction is coming from. And we've seen how God has been with God's people throughout all of these stories. And today, the last story that we get from the wilderness is Jesus being tempted in the wilderness. Jesus living the same story that his ancestors lived before they entered the promised land. So as we close with this story, I invite you to go with me to a few places where Jesus went after his 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness. And I invite you to listen to the wisdom that Jesus offers as you and I continue through this time of pandemic, through these times of injustice, of violence around the world, through these times where we feel that we're in a desert. I invite you to take this wisdom from Jesus with us and this good news that he offers us. The Spirit of God came on Jesus as he rose from the waters of his baptism, and she took him with her to the wilderness where they would meet the devil. Jesus began to fast, and after 40 days and 40 nights, he was starving. That's when the devil showed up. "Since you're God's son, command these stones to become bread," said the devil. That tempter. Those were words to a hungry man in the wilderness. No food to be found, only stones. Soon Jesus would be feeding thousands. The hungry would flock to him. Food would come out of nowhere. Empty stomachs would be filled. The feast would begin. Surely Jesus had the power to turn these stones into bread. But he remembered his ancestors, God's people who wandered in the wilderness without bread. And Jesus remembered Deuteronomy 8. "Remember the long way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness in order to humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commandments. He humbled you by letting you hunger, then by feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors were acquainted, in order to make you understand that one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord." Jesus looked at the devil and said just that. One does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. The devil knew Jesus wouldn't die of hunger, and he knew that he wouldn't die alone in the wilderness either. The devil knew the scriptures too. So he took Jesus to the highest part of the temple in Jerusalem to talk about death. "Since you're God's son, throw yourself down," said the devil. "You're not going to die. For it is written in Psalm 91, 'I will command my angels concerning you, and they will take you up in their hands so that you won't hit your foot on a stone.'" But Jesus knew that he would die. In just a short time, he would be hanging on a cross crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He would accuse God just like his ancestors accused God at Massah, when they cried out in Exodus 17, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" The wilderness brought God's people face to face with their own mortality. And Jesus remembered the lesson that it taught them. God is faithful. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Because God is not absent, not even when you face death. So Jesus looked at the devil, remembering all of this from Deuteronomy 6, and said, "Don't test the Lord your God." The devil knew that Jesus' time in the wilderness had come to an end. Just like God's people who wandered for 40 years in the wilderness, Jesus had learned in the past 40 days to put his full trust in God. But soon, Jesus would be back in the real world, and that lesson would be easy to forget. So the devil saw a chance to take away the one thing that helped God's people remember this lesson: worship. The devil took Jesus to the top of a tall mountain so they could see all of the kingdoms of the world, and they were glorious. As Jesus stood in awe, the devil looked at him and said, "I'll give you all of this if you bow down and worship me." Jesus had seen this trick before. Just before God's people ended their time in the wilderness, God told them in Deuteronomy 6, "Take care that you do not forget the Lord, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. The Lord your God you shall fear, him you shall serve, and by his name alone you shall swear." Worship would remind God's people forever that God is faithful, even in the wilderness, even now. God provided manna when the people were hungry and water when they were thirsty. So we don't need to grab for resources and recognition and power. God will give us what we need. So, Jesus said, "Go away, Satan. It is written, you will worship the Lord your God and serve only him." That was all Jesus had to say. The devil left, and angels came and took care of Jesus. Very soon, the time will come when all of the longings that we had in the desert will be fulfilled. The hungry will eat. The crowds will hear the good news. God will establish the kingdom in all the nations of the world.